The dystopian superhero thriller V for Vendetta was an instant hit upon its release in 2006, before going on to become one of the most popular movies of its decade. But the author of its source material, Alan Moore, was so opposed to the film's adaptation from graphic novel to silver screen that he decided to
give all of my money to the artists and in return would have my name taken off of the film.
After all, his comics were written to showcase what the medium of graphic novels could do that cinema couldn't.
They were written to be impossible to reproduce in terms of cinema. So why not leave them simply as a comic in the way that they were intended to be?
See, Alan Moore is considered by many to be
the greatest single creator of popular and thought-provoking fiction working in the medium of comics today.
He actually bowed out of the comics arena a few years ago, but over the course of his career as a graphic novelist, he crafted some of the most celebrated works of the medium, including Batman the Killing Joke, Swamp Thing, and perhaps most famously, Watchmen. As a man of integrity and immense creative imagination, he's long been unimpressed by Hollywood and its uninspired ways of generating content.
Hollywood clearly hasn't had an idea in the last 2 or 3 decades. Hollywood can only recycle things that have already been done or adapt things from media where they weren't intended as films. The thing that I'm dead set against is basically its adaptation. I believe it very seldom works, and I would also say that the films that I actually enjoy were generally written as films. I'm not really fond of adaptation from one media to another in general.
Moore's preference for original screenplays is a very personal one, and therefore kind of hard to argue with. But I think most film lovers would agree that many of the great American films, whether it be The Godfather, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Psycho, No Country for Old Men, or whatever else, have been directly inspired by works of another medium. Even some of Alan Moore's favourite films, like It's a Wonderful Life or The Devil and Daniel Webster, were adapted for the screen. But nonetheless, most of us would also likely agree that the endless string of comic book movies and spin-offs and adaptations of stage productions and remakes of movies that have already been remade is beyond tiresome at this point. And Alan Moore saw all of this coming years ago. Around the time of V for Vendetta's theatrical release, he said, "Comics are one step in the digestive process of Hollywood eating itself. Hollywood needs material to make into films as part of an economic process. It could be a Broadway play or a book, or a French film, or a good TV series from the 1960s, or a computer game, or a theme park ride. I expect that the next subjects of films will be breakfast cereal mascots, a film that chronicles how Snap, Crackle and Pop met and explores their relationship." He forgot to mention a film inspired by fashion dolls manufactured by an American toy company. Anyway, his disdain for the nature of entertainment corporations was so pronounced at this point that it was utilized in an episode of The Simpsons.
Mr. Moore, will you sign my DVD of Watchmen Babies?
You see what those bloody corporations do? They take your ideas and they suck them. Suck them like leeches until they've gotten every last drop of the marrow from your bones.
But Alan Moore didn't always take such an uncompromising stance against Hollywood and its inclination to adapt existing characters and stories.
Originally, I was content to just simply accept the money that was offered when people had adapted my comic books into films.
I was under the illusion that the way that films worked was that you got a lot of option money, and then after a couple of years, they decided that they weren't going to make the film, which was a perfect result. The film didn't get made, you got the money. Then they actually made a couple of my films.
The first film that they made of my work was From Hell, which was an adaptation of my Jack the Ripper narrative, in which they replaced my gruff Dorset police constable with Johnny Depp's absinthe-swigging dandy.
From Hell was an utterly disposable adaptation of inspired source material, which virtually everyone forgot about the moment after they saw it. But that's more than could be said for the next reworking of an Alan Moore novel, which was
The Regrettable League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where the only resemblance that it had to my book was a similar title.
When DC Comics greenlit a cinematic adaptation of V for Vendetta, Alan Moore had decided enough was enough.
I decided to refuse to accept any of the money for the films and to ask if my name could be taken off of them so that I no longer had to endure the embarrassment of seeing my work travestied in this manner.
Moreover, he said,
"If you are going to make them into films, please try to make them into better ones than the ones that I have been cursed with thus far."
With V for Vendetta and later Zack Snyder's Watchmen, Hollywood did in fact try to produce superior renditions of Alan Moore's work, but the author's no less dismissive of those films than the earlier ones. The thing is, it doesn't actually seem that Alan Moore has really watched any of these films.
Just to be clear, you've never seen these films?
Never seen them.
Well, how can you pass judgment on them?
Well, I do prefer to criticise things from a position of ignorance. I've also got a lot of friends who have seen these films and who are familiar with the books, and they assure me that there is only a coincidental resemblance.
Moore clearly believes that Hollywood's vision of his work would only serve to depress him beyond belief if he gave them the time of day. This is mostly because of his aforementioned view that the stories don't belong in the cinematic form, and partly because cinema is, for him, increasingly sensational and immature.
I have sometimes blamed a lot of what I see as disproportionate amount of lame modern cinema upon children's cop mobile manufacturers from the 1970s, because they have conditioned an entire generation to think, oh, it's moving, oh, it's making a noise, I'm entertained. I think that what film is capable of is so much more than it is being used for at present.
Although Moore meaningfully influenced and contributed to the superhero genre as an artist, it's the popularity of those stories in contemporary cinema that he seems to find most disheartening of all. In a 2020 interview, he said, "I haven't seen a superhero movie since the first Tim Burton Batman film. They have blighted cinema, and also blighted culture to a degree. Several years ago, I said I thought it was a really worrying sign that hundreds of thousands of adults were queuing up to see characters created 50 years ago to entertain 12-year-old boys. That seemed to speak to a kind of longing to escape from the complexities of the modern world and go back to a nostalgic, remembered childhood. That seemed dangerous. It was infantilizing the population."
Bad Deadpool.